The second half of the DVD, Building a Cob-Style Rocket Mass Heater, is focused on the teepee build. Our first edit had the teepee build at 2 hours and 30 minutes. It took a lot of whittling to get it down to an hour and 5 minutes. An early version of the intro and outro alone added up to about 45 minutes. It was tough to decide what to keep and what to throw out. That decision was easier with the idea that we would just throw this rough cut version up on YouTube.
For about 5 years, I had this idea that a rocket mass heater would heat the inside of a teepee and people would be comfortable inside of it. And this has to do with stories that you and Ernie told me when I very first met you of people doing something similar to this. But it's hard to say it's an uninsulated structure when you're looking inside of a typical building. A teepee is clearly an uninsulated structure. So then I kind of got on this thing where I need land in order to be able to build this thing and do the test. So I bought the land, and within months I had lined up this workshop. So it was October of 2013 when we had this workshop happen. And that was 3 winters ago. So now the idea is we're going to build this thing, and then of course somebody will live in here, and it'll get freezing cold outside, sub-freezing, sub-zero outside, and then at the end of the winter we'll ask them, so how was it? Was it cozy? And so that was the idea. That was the mission. That was the experiment. Now, of course, I called on Ernie and Erica to teach the workshop because I'd worked with them so many times before. And now we did argue about design quite a lot. And in the end, we went with your design. You want to tell folks about your design? Now, of course, you provided a drawing. You're looking at it probably right now.
It's a fairly small teepee, as teepees go. It's what, a 20-foot teepee? Maybe less?
I think when we originally built it, it was an 18-foot teepee, so an 18 feet in diameter teepee.
And that's at the bottom. That's at ground level, right?
And I think that the desires of the people in the teepee grew to be larger than the teepee itself. And it was a used teepee that had this weird green splotch on the front. It's like somebody was interested in painting the teepee, but they got bored about 20% into the job, and they just left it. So we picked it up cheap.
Uh-huh.
Now it has a brand new teepee, and it's a 20-foot teepee, giving it a little bit more room around the outside perimeter.
Okay. So we had been designing for that 20-foot teepee, and now it's actually here. And the goal really was to make it comfortable, not just survivable. Tony and Emily that stayed in here the first winter, they were both Forest Service experienced, like they had done winter camping, and so they were not intimidated by the experiment, but the goal was to go beyond what they would consider tolerable to something that the average person would consider comfortable.
Along those lines, I think most people would never want to do this experiment until somebody else has done the experiment and said that they were okay.
I've heard so many people saying they want one now. It's like driving me nuts because, of course, I'd rather that they got a small insulated structure and didn't need to use as much energy to stay warm. But it worked better than we...
It has been profound. I mean, there's now thousands of people that say that they want to do exactly what we did here. Because it's amazing how comfortable it is in the middle of winter, and you don't have an insulated structure. I mean, a teepee like this costs like $1,000.
So part of what we did with the design was to not only create a warm seating surface and a warm bed, but also to be able to catch the radiant heat off the barrel and create a wall that would be substantially warmer than the walls of the teepee itself. Let the teepee do its thing, act like a chimney, stay ventilated, but let's create a sort of a micro-environment inside that where the people and the radiant heat from the barrel and these walls can get a little warmer and stay a little,
The tall back of the bench acts as an additional mass, but then there is not something that is running through the walls to heat it. Instead, it's only the radiant heat from the barrel that hits the back of the bench and warms the back of the bench. Now, if you're here and you're sitting on the bench and you're thinking it's lovely and warm and the fire's going, someday, eventually, maybe an hour will pass, and where you're at, it's not as warm as the next spot over because the radiant heat has heated the back of the bench, and so then you move. That was part of the original design.
Yeah, so this part works like a warm rock in the sun, and this part is actively heated.
That is the design, and I think it's fair to say it totally works. Well, there's two important design points that I laid out, which screwed up your guys' designs, really. And so one of them is that I wanted the ability to test the exhaust in many ways. So in the fall of 2013, I wanted all of our rocket mass heaters to go through the suffering of the exhaust going out low. Now, we knew that was problematic, but we wanted to solve those problems. And the only way to solve those problems is to not only have the problem, but suffer with the problem. I mean, if you're not suffering, you're not going to invent something to fix the damn problem. So if we can solve the problem, I think that makes rocket mass heaters about 15% easier for a lot of people. Maybe not in practice, but at least in the ability of thinking that it'll be easier to implement. In the end, we didn't solve the problem. We're going to need somebody smarter than those of us that were here to try and solve that one, if it is indeed solvable. In the end, we routed the exhaust up through the top of the chimney. I think it's fair to say a conventional teepee, the idea is that you have the fire in the middle of the floor, and then from about here on up, it is a smoke fest. And so thus it's wise to learn how to sit Indian style on the floor. And then that way, hopefully your head is below all the smoke. And then the design of it is eventually the smoke works its way out the top. And then there's air coming in from the bottom to help feed the fire, and it goes on and on like that. With a rocket mass heater like this, there is no smoke on the inside unless you, do something really dumb with the wood feed, I suppose. And in fact, there's some discussion for later on. But in the end, the design was that they routed the exhaust up through the top. That was the way to get it to work the best. There was another design thing I threw at you, and that was that I wanted this to use a shippable core. And I was pressing really hard for our projects here to use shippable cores. Now, naturally, you just saw the Wafati rocket mass heater, and that one I did not require a shippable core because I wanted it to be the most normal, boring, standard way to build a rocket mass heater. But these shippable cores, I think, make a big difference in the future. So I insisted that we use a shippable core here. It was a prototype, an untested design. And we'll learn more about that in a moment.
We learned a lot about it. Yeah. No, and I think you kind of bait and switched us because the idea was we're going to make it so we know it works. We're going to do everything that we know how it works, except we don't want a chimney and we don't want the same combustion unit you've been using for the last 7 years. It's we're going to change the parts that make it work, but the other parts should be the way we know it works.
Well, you guys are used to teaching workshops and helping people learn this stuff from the perspective of doing things the way you've always done them that you know works.
Which is usually what people come to a workshop for. Yeah.
And one of the things, what do I call this property?
The lab.
Wheaton Laboratories, where we're going to experiment and we're going to do things weird so that we can learn shit. Yeah.
And experimenting comes with the risk of failure, and it also comes with it's the only way to get to a success that hasn't happened yet.
That's true. So. And I think the result has been we have grown dramatically. There have been some massive successes as well as some sad failures.
Yeah.
So it's been transformative.
Yeah.
But those were the things that I put on you during the design phase: shippable core and crazy exhaust.
Yeah. I'd like to go through the sequence of exhaust to make sure I understand everything that we tried.
Okay.
So maybe we can have the diagram show this, but we started with the pipe going through the bench and coming out, and then having an option to go back and double back under the bed and come out again. So we had the option of going just one loop and out, sort of a weird Chechnyan sigil and out. And we tried going out and down the hill, and we tried going down up the hill, and we tried to find some direction that was pointing with the wind instead of having the wind blow into it. And I don't remember ever actually finding that direction. The wind seemed to exactly not cooperate with all of our best intentions for trying to get that to work. So then we tried coming out off of either of those openings in the bench and going straight up from there. So it's farther from the barrel. It's not getting primed by the barrel, but it's a shorter path to go out. And that seemed to me to work better than going down, but it still wasn't as reliable as you were hoping for as far as people coming for the first time and being happy with being able to light it. So then we had a long discussion about whether we could go down and underground in order to get next to the barrel. One of the original designs had been a circle where you would just climb over the bench after you came in the door and the whole thing would be a loop, like a donut. And we decided not to do that because it's just awkward for people to have to like crawl through so many different
Yeah, like you just
levels.
crawled through a little hole.
Just crawl through a little hole.
It's like
now you got to go up and over. It's like you basically have to turn into some kind of a little martin by the time you get in
I was thinking an obstacle course. It's like
Yes,
every time you enter, you have to go through the obstacle course. And we decided not to do an obstacle course.
Yeah. So if I was going to do this style again in a teepee, what I would probably do, and I think this was on the table at one point, and then we decided not to do it, would be to come down and make a U, and then come back in and come to the barrel through the bench. Like just have a double pipe in the bench and a little bit wider bench.
I would do a stratification chamber.
Ooh, that could work too. Yeah, I
Damn
haven't
right.
played as much with those. But yeah, I would try to get the chimney next to the barrel now that we've tried a bunch of options for some other kind of thing besides a chimney that didn't work. I would try to keep the chimney next to the barrel in a way that created as little drag in the system as we could get away with. So.
You know, I think an important thing for this video series, as opposed to what people can see on YouTube, is that we're showing a final product after it has been used for at least one full winter. So this one's been used 3 full winters. And now here's a video about it. I think that's an important difference.
What really impresses me is people who have the integrity to show it how it failed after that full year.
True.
So here's what happened. Here's what I'm going to try this year. And then once you get to the point where you can cruise through a whole year and it's working, like that's super valuable.
Right.
Showing the failure points when you find them is really helpful to other people.
So like Rob Tortellini with Web for Deb. Yeah. Am I saying his? I'm probably not saying his name.
Torsellini.
Tortellini.
It would be, if he was Italian, it would be Tortellini.
Tortellini. Okay, all right.
If he's American, it's probably Torsellini. I don't know.
A good example is the website Web for Deb, which is on YouTube. And that guy had an experience that did not go well, and he shared it openly, which was really cool.
Yeah, he actually let us put it in our book, too.
Neat.
So.
With the Wafati, with the rocket mass heater at the Wafati, and sometimes this one, and with any rocket mass heater, these are all designed to be extremely optimized. And so they need a little bit of extra care to get started, and there's a trade-off. There are trade-offs with a rocket mass heater. But I'd say the number one thing that's the spookiest thing, the thing that is the most annoying, is what we call a cold plug. So we experienced a cold plug at the when we wrapped up building the Wafati, the rocket mass heater, the Cobb-style rocket mass heater at the Wafati. And what happened is that it was warmer outside than it was inside. And so really the thing you should do in that scenario is open a window rather than let's start the rocket mass heater.
Yeah, I would call that a cold start. If the mass is colder than the air outside, that's a cold start. And when we build for really warmer climates, like Southern California up in the mountains where you might want heat a few times a month for the cold parts of the year, in that scenario, I mean, you're almost using the mass more as a chiller, as a heat sink to soak up daytime heat. And if you want to be able to start it in what they think is cold...
Right. Oh, right. That's true. Oh, it's 69 degrees. Oh, I'm freezing to death. Somebody build a fire.
So to optimize for that situation, you make a much shorter bench. You plan on putting more heat out in the exhaust so that you can run it successfully in what we would consider warm conditions. That depends, that optimization for climate depends on where you're at. And so we tend to optimize in the colder climates for something that's going to be really efficient
Right.
in the parts of the winter where heat is a survival necessity. And it gets to be 60 degrees in the spring. We're like outside in t-shirts and we're really excited, and we're, skipping days. We're running the heater a couple times a week at that point.
Yeah.
So that's where it's almost calibration to climate.
So I want to point out that we have been doing some rocket heaters where they are an in-home heater, but they do not have a mass.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily the fault of the mass, but the mass is a contributor. So you get all this lovely hot exhaust going through the mass, and it's getting cooled rather quickly, and then it's warmer outside than the temperature of this cooled exhaust, and so it won't go out. I mean, it probably would go out if the exhaust was out the wall. It's like the one time that it works out the wall.
Yeah. If what you're dealing with is a cold plug in the chimney where you've got the moisture in the exhaust is condensing, you can actually have a cold plug while the chimney's warmer than outside air, but it's still, you've already reached the dew point of the water and you're getting a lot of water condensate in that exhaust. So yeah, that's where masonry heater builders tend to just always go for, close to the boiling point of water or above in their exhaust temperatures.
True.
And that takes care of that problem at the cost of putting a little bit more heat out with the exhaust.
If it's plenty cold outside, then these things tend to start right up. And in fact, through the winter, we don't have this problem at all. The only time we have this problem is usually when you start the fire for the first time in the fall, and it's really not cold enough outside.
Or when people come to visit you and you're really proud of your stove that you've been living with for the year and you try to demo it in July.
Yes.
We have learned the lesson of humility.
So
More than one occasion.
the cold plug problem is a very real problem, and I suppose we could try to think of things to solve it, but really it's the problem. I'd say the real solution is stop trying to start a fire in a rocket mass heater when it's warmer outside than it is inside, and just open a damn window already.
Or go outside.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. No, we have 2 or 3 pages in our book in the operations section about cold starts and all the different ways you can do that. And so, it's been explored pretty well. There's a lot of options. If you think that's going to be a problem, you'd want to, you don't want to be told not to start your stove when that situation's going on. We got other options.
So I would have to say the number one wrap-up note, so when the video ended, is that this bench was not done, and it looked rough, and it looked cold out. So a lot of fire was put to it to kind of stiffen it up good so we could start putting on some of the finishing plaster layers. I believe it was finished in several passes. I believe that it was partly done in the middle of winter and partly done in early spring of 2014, and to get the back of the bench nice and tall and sturdy. I mean, this feels crazy sturdy now. It feels like cement. I mean, that's part of the beauty of cob, is it kind of feels a little bit like cement, but it actually feels different than cement. I mean, this feels like something that's nice to sit on, whereas you sit on a cement bench, it feels way too hard and somehow awful.
I'm particularly proud of this one because I believe Tony and Emily had not done cob before they started working on this project. I don't know for sure, but that was my impression, is they were learning how to make cob. They wanted to check the recipes, and we ended up having to do advice by wire for the plaster. Like they had to sort of learn plaster by correspondence course. And I think they did a phenomenal job. I think they got a really nice earthen plaster on this.
Right. Now, I think that this is not... I've seen cob benches that were like fancier and finer and perfecter, but I kind of like the look of this. This fits the teepee really well. I think it's a beautiful, amazing thing to be in effectively somebody's home for several months. And we've had people who come out here for a week or two at a time to try to experience life with a rocket mass heater in this teepee so they can really understand the value of the rocket mass heater. So it's been a side benefit. But here we are, years later, the important thing is the experiment worked.
Yes.
At the end of the winter, Emily and Tony experienced one night where it was 26 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. And they got up and they were about to head out to work. And they took off their night clothes and they got into their day clothes. And then they got outside and they realized it was damn cold outside, 26 below. And they had no idea it was so cold outside. So they said that inside it felt like it was about 50 degrees, maybe a little over 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And the fire had been out for 8 hours.
I think that would be around 30 below centigrade, feeling like about 10 centigrade.
We'll put a little note up on the screen. When
See
the
if
time
I'm
comes.
right about that.
Okay. The big thing is that we're talking now about conductive heat and radiant heat. So the bench is now fully warmed up. The fire has been out for 8 hours. And on top of that, the back of the bench is warmed up. And so as they're getting dressed, then they're experiencing radiant heat off of the bench from many different places. And the air temperature might possibly in here be something like, let's say it's 30 degrees inside, well, it's 26 below outside, air temperature. But even though the air temperature is so low, they will feel warmer because they're getting radiant heat off of the bench. Plus, they just got out of bed where they were experiencing the most efficient form of heat, conductive heat. So their core is very warm already, and they're getting out of bed feeling very, very warm. And as they get dressed, they feel quite comfortable changing. Mm-hmm. And then it's not until they get outside that they realize it's 26 below. Then it helps to look at a thermometer. It's 26 below!
Well, yeah. No, I've had that experience. Now, we were living in Portland, so we don't really see 26 below very often.
Do you think?
Like, the teens was very exciting when we get down into the positive teens in Fahrenheit. But we had... We get maybe 5 snow days a year. For our winters, it's mostly just damp and cool. But we had one day where we were feeling like that sort of early spring t-shirt weather, and we come out and it's snowing. And, you know, it's just, it's a different quality of heat. It's not like when you're heating with forced air, it's like drying your skin out and you feel that there's warm air blowing on you, and it's like there's this feeling. And when you've got the radiant and conductive heat where it's just you're in a room with a large warm object made of earth, it feels a lot more like, you know, the earth itself is getting warmer. Like you have more of that sort of spring warm day feeling. So it's hard to describe.
If there was a conventional wood stove in here heating Emily and Tony on that cold, cold night, that when the fire went out, shortly after that, they would start to feel that cold. I mean, if nothing else, if they're like in a super warm sleeping bag of some kind, mm-hmm. then quickly their faces are going to get cold. Mm-hmm. And as they're breathing in that cold air, they're going to be feeling a lot like the ant wanted to be in on the show.
Thank you for not allowing him to reach my neck.
Oh, yeah, I'm saving you.
Very chivalrous.
With a conventional wood stove, I think that Emily and Tony would have started to feel really, really cold the moment the fire went out. I mean, you know, it gets down to coals, already they're starting to feel really cold. When the fire's completely out, they're probably far too cold. And then they're kind of switching into winter camping mode and regretting this camping trip. Like, why didn't we come out? Why didn't we look at the weather report before we left? Kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to say this to do a comparison between a conventional wood stove and a rocket mass heater. Now, the other thing is that this barrel is going to put out heat that is almost exactly the same as a conventional wood stove. Would you agree with that analysis?
When the fire's running, yeah.
When the fire is running. And then, of course, when the fire is over, this thing's no longer putting out any heat, really. Or at least it's putting out the same amount of heat as a conventional wood stove.
I would disagree, because in my house I've got the brick heat riser, and so I'll come out in the morning and this is still, you can touch it, but it's still significantly warmer
because it's got a lot of brick inside of it
There's a
holding
lot of
the
brick
heat.
holding heat, and it's acting like a bell. The heat stratifies at the top. It doesn't flow out the chimney as easily.
Very good point.
So I think they hold heat a little bit better than a conventional wood stove, but they're certainly more responsive like that, not storing heat as long as the mass.
And of course, the mass itself is providing a great big gob of magic here,
Yes.
as it's extracting a lot of that heat and storing it into the mass. And that's how Emily and Tony felt warm through the night. And then they still felt quite warm when they got out of bed in the morning and they changed their clothes.
Yeah. Yeah.
About a week into the first run of this rocket mass heater, the shippable core that was in here that you built, which was beautiful. It was amazing. But the material it was built out of turned out to be less than optimal, and it started to crack, and then it started to crumble. Cracking you could kind of deal with, but the crumble, you can't. That one, so it's finally, you're like, after a while, after a week, it had to be removed. And
To be fair, I think it froze a couple of times during that week.
fair enough.
So it really might not have been the material itself. It might have been the curing conditions that we really didn't get nailed down that time.
So, but that's another discussion for the shippable cores. We have lots of speculation on why those failed. And we built a bunch more trying to like prove that was not the problem. This wasn't the problem. That wasn't, they all crumbled. Not your fault. It's the material's fault, damn it. Or we didn't know enough about the curing process or something.
Early prototype. These
There
things
you
happen.
go. So this rocket mass heater is now sporting the wood box style shippable core. So we took out the castable and we put a wood box style, and it eventually got entirely covered in cob because that's pretty. And to date, there's been no problem. There's been no issue. I mean, it's possible we want to pop it open at some point and have a look at it, because it's also a prototype.
Mm-hmm.
And but we've built a few more of those that are doing just great. So that have been used for a long time. Have a look. So there was a point in time when Erica and I had a difference of opinion.
Only one.
Well, okay, there's been a bunch of these times. All right. And sometimes I was wrong, but I want to tell the story of one time when I was right. So I had this idea of like, well, let's take the exhaust that runs through this thing and go underground and come up next to the barrel and go out, and that it might make a much stronger draw. And you said, nuh-uh. And Ernie also agreed with you, as a good husband should. He said, nuh-uh.
I think Ernie's argument was that you were going to get cold plugs in that underground section.
Oh, should I echo the arguments that you made during that time?
I would agree with that. I think that they're still seeing some problems with that, but I
Well,
think your
Your design overall is that as the duct is laid, to make the duct go ever so slightly up as you go further down. And that helps with the draw. Because really the thing is that if you build a rocket mass heater and it has a poor draw, that is so frustrating. You start getting smoke back and stuff like that. So really the magic is make a rocket mass heater that has a strong draw. And we were doing all kinds of things to make it so you couldn't have a strong draw.
Yep.
So we're giving you all the challenges. And so you're trying to buy that extra 5% by making the duct go slightly uphill the whole path of the duct.
Yep.
So that's the start. So the moment I said, oh no, go down like 2.5 feet and then come across the floor underground and then come back up, you were kind of like, no, I went to all that trouble to make it go slightly uphill and you're going to ruin all of that.
There's also the slight problem that the sand for this teepee pad was actually cob with clay in it. So we're talking about something going down through potentially frozen ground. Yeah.
Adventure!
Right. I tend to like my designs to be robust enough that you have to do like hopefully more than 2 things wrong to have them screw up. And so I'm not always wanting to push the limit of how many things can we do wrong before it stops working.
We have a lot of people come here to Wheaton Labs because they're excited about all the projects we're doing, and they show up and they say, I'm here for a week and I want to work on whatever is your toughest problem. And so at one particular time, there was a guy, Michael Beyer, and he is the props guy for the Penn and Teller Magic Show. So he's used to like getting things to work in teeny tiny spaces. And so when he arrived and he said, I'm here for a week, give me your toughest problem, I thought, what is a crazy thing that we have to get to work that's almost like magic? And then I thought of the thing where we had a little bit of a disagreement. And of course, I'm thinking like, I think I'm right. And I want to find out, because I want to say, I told you so to Ernie and Erica. I need that.
What you're telling me is that there's a distinct possibility that the exhaust from here to there is going through a different dimension of backstage space?
As far as you know. Now, we did reveal all of the secrets, as Penn and Teller do for all of their tricks. And so we went down underground. We went down like 2.5 feet, I think. Maybe even a little bit more than 2.5 feet, across the floor for the entrance, and then up and right next to the barrel. And of course, he did all kinds of magic to get that to be right next to the barrel. And so it heats that vertical exhaust so that we get it improved the draw order of magnitude. So it's 10 times stronger draw. And a lot of our concern is that somebody's going to show up for the rocket mass heater experience in the teepee and stay here a week in the winter, and they're going to start a fire and it'll smoke back, and they're going to say, well, it was warm and it was lovely and it was everything that they said, but there was smoke coming out of that. And even though, because at the time we were kind of thinking like, it's a teepee, who cares, the whole thing's designed to hold smoke. And so but I thought they might come to the conclusion that I would never want to put one in my home because I don't want that smoke in my home. And so we wanted to have one that did not smoke back at all. And so the result was a success. This is the part where you tell me I was right and you were wrong.
Can I say good job, Paul? Is that close enough?
I'll settle for that.
Congratulations.
I'm having a little party in my own head.
Congratulations on your successful experiment.
Okay, all right. You were wrong. I was right. This has worked out really well. And I think in the end, even you embrace, I mean, I'm rethinking a duct for a lot of systems and how we go about doing it. And that we could, with putting the exhaust so close to the barrel, I think that we could do much longer lengths of duct if we choose to go this way. I kind of wonder about our experiments with the stratification chambers.
The bell. In masonry heating, those are called a bell.
Sure. And I kind of think that, in fact, I had a long talk with Peter Vandenberg in this teepee about the idea of doing this whole thing as a stratification chamber. And in fact, you might even make it go slightly uphill over to the bed, so the bed ends up being warmer than the rest of the bench, which I thought was a pretty fascinating idea too. Yeah. But we've got more on that in DVD 4.
Cool. Yeah. No, bells and stratification works. I think it works really well. In my head, at least, it works really well. And the only challenge is getting people who haven't done masonry before to make a good airtight chamber. And so that's where the pipe makes it like, it's like fluid flow for dummies. You put the pipe where you want the fluid to go and it holds the right volume, and you don't have to figure volumes and so on. That's part of why we have so much trouble with the manifolds, I think. So one space you have to build.
Tight.
Well, it's tight clearances, but even if you do it without the barrel, like if you just give yourself as much space as you want, the process of imagining invisible fluids moving through a space in order to get to other spaces and what's going to happen when fly ash, that part is complicated, and you're visualizing negative space, and it has to be airtight. A bell could easily be much simpler in construction, but you still need solid masonry technique to do an arch or a dome or a lintel or something, some kind of slab that's going to handle that.
Right.
People have been doing it for thousands of years. Are people ready? I don't know. They might be.
Well, and another thing about the duct system is that when you're doing a duct system with cob, people seal it really well. Cob seals really well. Yeah. And when people are doing a stratification chamber, they might tend to be a little less cautious. They might allow more leaks to be formed.
And you got to have the practical know-how to spot leaks and fix them. And a lot of people...
Or use cob and it just seals itself.
Yes and no. I mean, is this leak big enough? Is that crack big enough that I'd be worried if there wasn't a pipe in there?
Does the crack go all the way down to the duct?
Right. Can you figure that out?
Does
Many people that I know could figure that out and could, like, take some water in a spoon and make that crack go away.
And then there's that.
So cob is pretty user-friendly, and actually clay-based materials were often used in, like, the Roman hypocausts and the Chinese floor platform stoves, the king stoves.
The king stoves.
Yeah. So it's like, we've literally been doing this for thousands of years, and at the same time, it's been kind of a specialized art to know how to do it and maintain it and keep it safe.
The king bed stove. That's what it was
King
called.
bed stove,
I was thinking
yes.
king stove. Why does it sound wrong? It's the king bed stove.
That is one of the ways people say it, yes.
What, you think they just say king stove? People say king stove without bed stove. They don't say king bed stove.
Very few people who are not Chinese or masonry heater builders say this at all.
Yeah, they have a whole other word for it. I don't even understand it.
In Korean, there's the ondol, which is similar. But, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there's potential, I think, for using a bell or a stratification chamber and using a little bit of slope and getting away from the pipes. But we've had so much trouble with workshop students having trouble sealing the manifold that moving into an entire project that's built that way with that level of professionalism in the workshop setting has been just a little intimidating.
Cob is very forgiving in many ways. And so if you're going to do it cob style, it's difficult to screw it up. I mean, it's harder. I mean, your DIY level doesn't need to be as high.
Yeah, and your go back and fix it potential. I mean, you can fix it invisibly.
True.
Patches on cob are very doable. So yeah,
and it still looks nice.
And it's dirt cheap.
When finishing cob is clay and sand and sometimes straw. And then when you're trying to make a nice, lovely finishing layer and you're choosing to use some straw can be a little chunky. It can be, it's like it ends up not being a very pretty aesthetic. And it's kind of like, how do I take that fiber aggregate? Because that's what you're doing when you're adding straw. You're trying to add a fiber aggregate. So it'll be less cracking and it'll be more cohesive and things like that. So it's like, I want it to be smaller, easier on the eyes. I still want it to be fibrous, but not a real long strand, and definitely not a fat strand. Like straw is a thick piece.
It's got those joints from the grass joints too.
Yeah,
those tend to just be a pain in the neck to try to get them.
So you're trying to do a finished layer of cob, and so it turns out that ruminants such as cattle are actually, maybe people don't know this, they're actually like little beer factories. They bring in an organic matter, grass, and then they make beer out of it, and whatever they can't make beer out of gets shot out the back end. And then this material happens to be a fiber aggregate that it has just the right consistency for what we need to make cob really awesome, especially a finishing plaster layer. And as it turns out, Emily and Tony read that. And they exercised that option. And then now Emily and Tony have an important point for anybody thinking about using this material in their cob. Use the old stuff. Don't use the fresh stuff. Because the inside of this teepee, which is extremely well ventilated, had a special odor for 3 days.
I could live with 3 days, because having put linseed oil on things, you end up with like 3 weeks plus that you're smelling that smell. Granted, I wouldn't want to have my sleeping bag on it at the time during those 3 days.
Okay.
But yeah, both cow and horse manure you can use the dried stuff. A lot of our natural builder friends say the fresh stuff actually has enzymes in it that will help harden the plaster. Like you actually get a better finish result.
Wow. So like,
and it certainly doesn't smell now.
So out the back end of this beer making machine comes not only this fiber aggregate that you could use, but other building materials as well.
Special hardeners. Yeah. Fully 100% organic. I wouldn't say they're food grade.
Okay.
Yeah, what you don't want to do is use something like the composted steer manure where it's already looking like dirt. Like that's not going to do anything for you. That's for your garden. That's not for plasters. it turns out that people are really excited about the rocket mass heater and the teepee, and they're starting to like want to come and call it glamping, like glamour camping, and have their experience of being in the teepee. It's become one of the most popular spots to stay in Wheaton Labs.
I'm not sure how glamping it is. Definitely camping. I mean, I think we could get to glamping someday, but I do know that a lot of people love to come and experience this, and especially people that might be on the fence about whether rocket mass heaters do all that they say that they do. Then they can come out, spend a week out here in the winter. Some people just spend 3 days or so, or 3 nights, I should say, to really kind of get a feel of some cold nights with this rocket mass heater, and experience waking up in the morning and it still feels quite warm, knowing the fire's been out for at least 8 hours. I think that's been a big draw. A lot of people have come up for that. And of course, a lot of people come out here for a lot of other reasons too. I believe the tour out here currently takes 3 hours if people don't ask questions, and 5 hours if they do.
Yeah. No, it just tickled me that this is one of the popular places that people want to come hang out now.
I think that this is probably one of our most photographed things.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had models on this bench and photographers. Oh man, fancy photographers and fancy photography gear, like wanting to take pictures of it and everything. So this has turned out to be a huge positive. And of course, there's this whole thing where, I don't know, thousands of people are saying that this, like they're going to buy raw land and go back to the land, and this is their beginning structure, that they want to do what we did here.
I am so ambivalent about that.
You know, there is an important design point to bring up, and that is that the floor of this is higher than the ground outside.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were really worried about water coming into this space, and so we went to a lot of trouble to make sure that the floor in here is much higher. Now, we are still concerned about wicking into this space. Like, water could be a couple of feet outside the teepee, and it could wick its way in, and that's why the whole thing is built up on rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from an anecdotal perspective, I haven't seen any water inside here ever. And I think it's a lot because of the shape of how this is up higher than the surrounding land. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of it. So the shaping the ground before we even started to build was an important part.
Yeah. And I want to give a thank you to Tony and Emily for all the work they put in on it. They came in with some rock stacking skills that made that workshop go a lot better, and I remember them being out here even before we left after that workshop, making sure there was the little slope coming away from the teepee so that it wouldn't build up too much water and snow there. So
Emily and Tony have made this space extra awesome.
yes.
If you like this sort of thing, come on out to the forums at permies.com, where we talk about rocket mass heaters, homesteading, and permaculture all the time.